All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the psychological battlefield of Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov. We're going to look at the fascinating ways his internal schism projects outward into the world, shaping what is honestly one of the greatest character studies in all of literature. If you've ever wondered how ideology, morality, and the subconscious collide, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get into it. So, this division actually begins with his very name. And Dostoevsky definitely didn't just pick it out of a hat. Rascal literally translates to split or schism. Right from the title page, the author perfectly sets his protagonist up as a man torn right down the middle, constantly bouncing between two deeply opposing psychological forces. He's not just a character, he's literally a walking embodiment of division. On one side of this massive split, we're introduced to a young man driven by a cold, calculated, almost grandiose ideology. He's entirely convinced he has the inner right to just step right over traditional morality. He famously declares, "Power is given only to the man who dares stoop and take it. There is only one thing needed, only one, to dare." He completely believes he's this extraordinary Napoleon figure, viewing the world as something to just be conquered by sheer will, and viewing humanity as mere material for the taking. But this raises a really fascinating question, and it's the one that drives the entire suspense of the narrative. If he truly believes he's an untouchable Superman, an absolute master of his own destiny, why does his subconscious relentlessly sabotage his grand plans? The very mind that orchestrated a perfect crime almost immediately begins to tear itself completely apart. Okay, let's move right into Act 1, ideology versus the subconscious. To really understand his rational side, we have to look at the article he published. In it, he actually rationalizes his impending crime by arguing that exceptional individuals, the extraordinary ones, are obligated to eliminate obstacles for the greater good. They supposedly have this inner right to step over laws. And fun fact, the Russian word for crime, prestuplenie, literally means to step over. He argues that new lawgivers basically have to shed blood to achieve their visionary goals. However, opposing all this cold logic is what the source text identifies as the law of self-destruction. Dostoevsky was brilliantly anticipating modern Freudian theories here. While Raskolnikov's conscious mind is desperately trying to preserve itself and hide the crime, his subconscious is driven by this masochistic need to constantly betray himself, completely countering his basic instinct for self-preservation. And honestly, this completely explains why he acts so erratically after the murder. I mean, it's why he blurts out those wild mock confessions to police clerks like Zamidov, trying to pass them off as jokes. It's why he compulsively goes back to the crime scene to ring the bell and ask about the blood. It's even why he wanders automatically, like totally suppressing his conscious memory, directly to an inn to meet his dark mirror, Svidrigailov. His subconscious is practically screaming for the punishment that his rational mind is trying to deny.
Which brings us to Act 2, rational egoism versus humility.
Now, what's really cool is that Raskolnikov's internal split isn't just personal. It actually reflects the broader, explosive philosophical battles of 1860s post-reform Russia. His mind is basically a microcosm of a divided nation. We can contrast the modern, utilitarian ideas of rational egoism, pushed by characters like the bourgeois Luzhin and the radical Lebezyatnikov, against the selfless Christian humility represented by the suffering Sonia. Rational egoism argues that science prohibits compassion and prioritizes pure utility. Sonia's humility, on the flip side, is all about selfless devotion, sacrificing for others, and accepting suffering. And the sheer danger of this rational egoism, you hear it perfectly in that conversation Raskolnikov overhears in a tavern. 1 death and 100 lives in exchange. Why, it's simple arithmetic. It literally reduces complex human morality to basic math, providing this terrifying, perfectly logical justification for Raskolnikov's brutal double murder. According to the theory, if it benefits the majority, the crime is wiped clean. Looking impartially at the source material, we can see Dostoevsky using these half-baked utilitarian theories completely neutrally to expose the dangers on all sides of the political spectrum. On one extreme, rational egoism justifies ruthless, laissez-faire capitalist exploitation and pure self-interest. We see that in Luzhin. But on the other extreme, that exact same logic justifies violent left-wing radicalism, political terrorism, and the forceful building of a utopian New Jerusalem. Raskolnikov is trapped right in the middle of these really dangerous extremes. All right, let's jump to Act 3, Mirrors, Svidrigailov and Sonia. This is where Dostoevsky's genius truly shines, right? Raskolnikov's internal duality is literally walking around in the world as two incredibly symbolic characters. Enter Svidrigailov. This guy immediately recognizes the dark, sadistic, self-willed side of Raskolnikov. He looks right through the student's intellectual justifications and terrifyingly claims him as a peer, stating, "Well, wasn't I right when I said we were kindred spirits?" He flat out tells Raskolnikov they're cut from the exact same cloth. So the crucial takeaway here is this allegorical triangle. Raskolnikov is trapped between Svidrigailov's ruthless self-will, which represents his murder of the pawnbroker Alina, and Sonya's sacrificial suffering, which represents his murder of the unintended, innocent victim, Lizaveta. He's literally torn between the monster and the victim. Because he couldn't murder Alina without also killing the innocent Lizaveta, his fate is now permanently tied to both the monster Svidrigailov and the saintly Sonia. And notice the deep connections here. Sonia exchanged crosses with the murdered Lizaveta. She reads from Lizaveta's Bible. Raskolnikov is driven to confess to Sonia, but in this brilliant twist of staging, Svidrigailov is secretly eavesdropping on that very confession. The two poles of Raskolnikov's mind are literally sharing the exact same physical space. All of this tension hits a massive emotional climax when Sonia, with a trembling voice, reads the story of the raising of Lazarus from the Gospel of John. This is the exact moment she plants the first agonizing seed of resurrection into his stubborn, rational mind. The idea that life can somehow emerge from death and corruption finally begins to take root. And finally, let's head into our conclusion: a human error. Tracing his inevitable journey out to the frozen isolation of Siberia, we finally get our resolution. Raskolnikov's friend, Razumihin, who is really the voice of reason in the novel, perfectly diagnoses the whole situation. By pursuing falsehood, you will arrive at the truth. The fact that I am in error shows that I am human. It's precisely by generating these horrific theories and making these catastrophic blunders that Raskolnikov proves he isn't some flawless Superman. He's painfully, undeniably human. His error is the absolute proof of his humanity. Out in Siberia, the schism actually starts to heal, and it's not through intellectual debate, but through life itself. He totally abandons his cold, calculated logic in favor of genuine, living reality. He finally realizes his crime was just a blind, stupid blunder, and slowly he begins to absorb Sonia's feelings and aspirations. The split self finally begins to merge into a whole human being. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with Svidrigailov's honking riddle, one that perfectly summarizes Raskolnikov's divided self and honestly, maybe the dual nature of humanity itself. Am I a monster, or am I myself a victim? In our modern world full of rigid ideologies and extreme rationalizations, how often do we find ourselves split right down the middle, playing both parts? Think about it. Thanks so much for exploring the depths of the divided self with me.